Tell you that I model in HO. So while the techniques in here certainly can be transferred to other scales, um, a lot of the products that I may be calling out here may or may not be available in other scales. And then finally, as I had mentioned, there's 90 slides here. So if anybody needs a break, if you are there gathered in the room with the administration and you guys want to throw up a red flag and say, hey, give us 5 minutes. I know what happens as we get older. So you won't offend me. So with that, let's talk about streetscapes. All right, there we go. Okay. Well, my inspirations for this, one of my mentors in the hobby was a gentleman who passed away, I guess 6 or 7 years ago, and he had done a clinic back in 1988. He was a city manager, and he had a clinic called Modeling Public Works Projects, and it was done with photographic slides and a carousel slide projector. We've certainly come a long way since then, but I kind of wanted to do what he did, but update it to more modern standards. Some of the layouts that I've seen that I think do a particularly good job of modeling city infrastructure are the Western Pennsylvania Model Railroad Museum. You may remember Victoria Falls series from Magnuson Models. I think that's now been incorporated, or some of it's been incorporated into the Walthers line. Design Preservation Kits and City Classics has a great website. Jim Sacco, who passed away 2 years ago, you may know the name from City Classics. He did a 2 foot by 4 foot module, which was the first model railroad I ever saw that focused on strictly urban scenery. And it just captured my imagination and intrigued me to no end. I saw as we started out here, Rich Murphy, you've got your background there with a nice country road. We're not going to talk about country roads. We're going to talk about cities. If you've ever been to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, they have an incredible layout from Chicago to Seattle called The Great Train Story. You may have seen postings on social media from Vic Smith's City Edge layout, which is just the pinnacle of urban scenery to me. And I just want to recognize and thank all of you who open your doors and your layouts to let others share your knowledge and see what you've done with your layout. So what's streetscape? What does that mean? It's the appearance or view of a street, and it includes street surfaces, curbs, sidewalks, utility poles, water and gas lines, storm and sanitary sewers, street lights, traffic signals, and other details. It doesn't mean let's go buy the Lifelike kit and see how much stuff we can cram into a scene, whether it's realistic or not. That is not the point and not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to try and make this as realistic as we can. That is a typical urban street scene. It's got mixed pavement, as you can see, brick and asphalt. It's got painted curbs, newspaper boxes, parking meters. Way off to the right there, there's a mailbox, bus stop signs, hourly parking signs, concrete sidewalks, and a handicap ramp there on the left. That is the look that just jumps out at me and begs to be modeled. That's the module that I had mentioned that Jim Sacco did many years ago. It was a 2 foot by 4 foot standardized module, and it just really jumped out at me as this is something I want to do someday. Here's another layout. I can't tell you where it came from. I grabbed this off the internet, but much earlier era, probably early 1900s. But talk about a busy, interesting street scene. You can see there a litter newspaper lying there in the gutter by the traffic signal. You've got your power utility poles up above. There's even plants hanging in hanging baskets on the porch of that apartment building. I love this one. I think the weathering is particularly effective, what was done here with the streets and the sidewalks. But you've got traffic signs, you've got street lights, fire hydrants. I love all the windows in the buildings, although I wouldn't really call that streetscapes, but all the different window coverings and window shades at different elevations. And you can see looking down the street here on the left, there's garbage cans, there's mailboxes, all those things that make a city a city. Here's a little bit closer detail of another layout. The thing I particularly like about this, because you don't see it modeled very frequently, is a storm sewer right here. That is what I would call an open throat storm sewer, very common in urban areas. And if for no other reason, that makes this picture significant. There's a gentleman, and I'm sorry to say I can't remember his name, but he has a very modern, I believe it's a BNSF layout, or it could be Union Pacific, but it's one of the Western roads. And he's got fast food restaurants and motels, and it's certainly more modern, but it's got all the features that an urban landscape would have. You can see on the bottom right corner there's a stop sign with the street name sign on top of it. He's got painted curbs. He's got curb cuts where the driveways are, very realistic power poles. And this is the layout I mentioned in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry. This is downtown Chicago. And they could have a little more detail, but just the size and the scope of it is stunning. This is Vic Smith's layout that I mentioned. I think his layout is really the pinnacle if you're modeling an urban landscape. Just the crosswalks, the fire hydrants, the painted curbs, and the weathering on everything is just amazing. So let's talk about street surfaces first, because I think they're the most obvious when we look at a scene. We can zoom in on other details once we get through this. Certainly the main materials you're looking at are either concrete, asphalt, brick, or cobblestone. And the details you want to model would include joints, cracks, potholes, traffic markings, utility patches, and delamination or mixed paving surfaces. Now let's get this out of the way before we get too into this, because it's going to come back to visit us throughout the presentation. How wide is a street? Well, most municipalities and most state transportation departments state that a minimum lane or a standardized lane should be 12 feet wide. So when you see a 2-lane street without parallel parking, typically you're looking at a 24-foot street. This particular standard that I grabbed here also shows that the street should be graded 7 feet back on each side of the pavement to allow for clear sight distances before you get into a slope either up or down. If there's sidewalks, the sidewalks would be included in that 7-foot distance in this particular town. But your total width then for the entire street from edge of excavation or edge of hill to the other side is 38 feet. But remember that 12-foot distance. That's important. Okay, I don't know how many of you may have tried the Walther's Cornerstone Series street kits. They come in concrete, brick, and asphalt, and I love them, but they have their limitations. They are molded pieces of styrene, and they all fit together like a puzzle, and I've got some photos to show that. If you want to try and do it on your own without the Walther's kit, you can buy styrene plastic and make your own concrete streets by scoring those to model joints. You can use spackling that you spread out with a squeegee, or you can use Woodland Scenic Smooth It, which is pretty much the same approach. It gives you the ability to color that with pigment in your mix, or you can paint it when you're done. Personally, I have never used the Smooth It product. I certainly see its application, particularly if you're doing more rural roads that are curved. But frankly, it scares the heck out of me. I'm wondering, for those who who have used it on rural roads what you use to contain it at the edge of that street. And I would think some of this uh, weather stripping tape that's self-adhesive, that's foam. They have open cell and closed cell. The closed cell is more dense. I would think that might work if you were to lay that out first and then use that as a almost like a formwork to pour your material. This is a Walthers kit. This happens to be the concrete one, but it comes in a straight kit only, like an expansion pack, or a general kit that includes intersections and corners. The straight kit, which I've got a couple of, includes enough material for 17 and a half feet of two-lane street. It includes material for the curb and the sidewalk. You can see in that picture in the upper left there, I've got the two pavement lanes pushed together, and then there's a curb section, and then a sidewalk section behind that. And those all get glued together to create the whole width of the street from side to side. Of course, what grabbed me about the kit was that they have absolutely fantastic manhole covers that are as realistic as can be. And they also have curb cuts with driveway ramps, which are very difficult to model and try and make them look realistic. So I think this is a wonderful feature of the kit. If you put one of these on your layout, what you're looking at, these street lanes are 20 feet wide each. So from curb to curb, gutter to gutter there, we have a 40-foot street. That's great for parallel parking on both sides, because a parallel parking space is typically 8 feet wide, and take 8 feet off of 20, and what's the magic number? 12, right? A 12-foot lane is what you want to have. You can see here how the curb fits in with the sidewalk on the right side. This situation is really nice because the buildings on the left, where there's kind of buildings that come with a gray concrete base to build the kit on, so they already had a sidewalk. I wouldn't need to add a sidewalk in front of those buildings. So this was a very nice way to add a sidewalk on one side, but use the existing sidewalk on the other side. These sidewalks from the Walthers kit are 5.5 feet wide. We'll talk a little bit about what's a reasonable amount for a sidewalk. But I want to ask you at the bottom here to consider selective compression. One of the things we're always trying to do with our layouts is fit as much in as we have space for. And if every street you model is 40 feet wide, your whole layout in an urban area is going to be street, not buildings. So the late, great Jim Sacco, he was of the opinion that we should think about maybe eliminating street parking on one side of the street. Give the feel of it by having it, but only have it on the one side. And he said maybe consider doing one-way streets, because with a one-way street, you don't need the two full lanes. You can maybe get away with a 20-foot wide street instead of a 40-foot wide street. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Maybe do your main bustling main street or avenue out of this material, but then do something narrow on your side streets. The civil engineer in me comes through here because I love the fact that the Walthers street system here gives you a raised crown in the middle, so that you actually have streets that slope towards the gutter. And that's the way a real street works. There should be about a 2% fall from the crown of the road over to the gutter line. Not easily done if you're going to make them yourself. All right, this is an underpass that I have on my layout. And I made this street out of masonite. A colleague of mine was saying that that's what he does for all of his streets. And I thought, well, let's try it. So I just took a piece of masonite and used gray spray paint, sprayed the thing, and then did some weathering where the traffic lanes were, did some traffic markings. The laser cut sidewalk on both sides of the street there came with that underpass kit. That's the Merchant Street underpass from Monroe Models. I will say that that sidewalk is a pretty wide sidewalk for most city scenes. It measures out to 11 scale feet in HO scale. And then they don't have any provisions in that kit for storm sewers, but I did find some white metal storm sewer castings, and I was able to file out a rectangular hole before I put this whole assembly in place. So that's what I have on the left there, and I'll reference the maker of that casting later on in the presentation. The only downside I felt with this scene was that behind the automobile there, I have three. Anybody know what those are? Water valves. Anytime you've got water lines underneath a street, somewhere where they meet together at a, say in this case, a T intersection, you're going to have a valve on each line so that if there's a break, you can shut that line off. I used finishing nails, but I drilled a hole to embed the head of that finishing nail in. And the problem with masonite is when you drill a hole in it, it tends to bubble up around the edge of that hole. It tends to start to come apart. And I pounded that thing and pounded that thing, and I could not get rid of those dimples. So that's what I'm left with. But other than that, I'm very pleased with that scene. I like the sidewalk, and I think the street looks reasonable. This is another street that I made. It's actually an interstate highway, but I decided to just make this myself out of styrene. Very simple when you're doing a straight stretch of road. Not so simple when you get into curves. I did put a riser piece in the middle so that I would have a cross slope to the street, so that they would indeed have that 2% drainage. And because this was an interstate highway, it's got a Jersey barrier down the middle. Those are available from a number of manufacturers. Just look on eBay and you will find them. Many people are 3D printing these days. And when you scribe the lines in it for the traffic lines, for the slabs, and add traffic markings and a little weathering, that's what I ended up with. The 2 lanes on the left side have been weathered. You've always got a little bit of oil stains and splatter that comes off of cars. The 2 lanes on the right have not yet been weathered. That's yet to come. But I think it turned out pretty well. And that's where it sits on the layout in place. I bought a silicone mold at the big train show up in Springfield, the Amherst show, back in, I think, 2018. And I thought this guy had a really neat system. And I wanted to learn more about it. And every year that I've gone back since then, he's not been there. And I checked this morning before this clinic. And unfortunately, that sterlingmodels.com website doesn't exist anymore. So I expect he retired and hung up his hat. But he sold this mold that you could fill with plaster and create any different assortment of sidewalk slabs. They are 3/16 of an inch thick. Now, I'm sorry to say, I can't remember whether he used smooth it or vinyl spackling, or did he do masonite. But if he used 1/8 inch masonite with 3/16 thick sidewalk slabs, that would give you a 1/16 inch curb reveal, and that's just about right. So that may have been what he did. I wish I could remember, but I cannot. But I think you could use either method. But I thought the genius of what he did was he took strip styrene and used that for his curbs, and then filed or sanded his sidewalks to fit in behind it. So when you're done, you've got a great looking curb that's continuous. You could take an X-Acto knife or a razor saw and cut some joints in it every now and again. But overall, I think it gives a very good effect. The downside is I'm not as good as I should be with plaster casting. I've done some rock molds, but I need a little practice before I go professional on this. Now, if you're not too concerned about the center crown in the road, and this one was going to be really difficult because of its shape, This is an overpass on my layout that is up against the backdrop. And I had cut a hole in the masonite backdrop where the railroad went through into another room. And it was approximate when I did it. And unfortunately, when it came down to time to build this bridge, that hole was a little bigger than I wanted it to be, a little higher than I wanted it to be. So I wanted this road to disappear into that slot to give that feeling that it was continuous so you wouldn't see a gap there. So this is a 3D printed bridge railing here. I used a piece of styrene that I made from a pattern, and then I glued down a sidewalk on top of it. So you've got a lamination there of sidewalk on top of styrene, and then painted it and put traffic markings down. And it's not perfect, but it's not bad. What was really fun about this was you can see in the lower right picture, there's an expansion joint there in the sidewalk. Well, the city of Pittsburgh, if you look at the aerial photo of this bridge, which is on Brighton Road on the north side of Pittsburgh, when they paved the street, they just paved right over the expansion joint. And wonder of wonders, over a couple of years' time, the pavement cracked right where the expansion joint was. So that is absolutely realistic. I'm getting so anal now that I'm modeling cracks exactly like the real roads. But here is something that I can't wait to try. And my next sidewalk project will be made of these sidewalk sheets that Evergreen Styrene makes. They're thin. They're only 0.04 inches thick, but you could sandwich them on top of another piece of styrene to give you the thickness you desire. And then just like that Sterling Models photo showed, you could take strip styrene, make that your curb, and wrap it around at the intersections where you want your curves to be. I should say, I forgot to say this before about the Walthers kit. While I think their road system is wonderful, it only accommodates 90-degree intersections. And I don't know about your layout, but my layout's got some weird intersections that are not 90 degrees. So I think it would be pretty difficult to get in there and try and modify that to make, say, a 30-degree intersection or a 60-degree intersection. But I may have to try that at some point. But in any event, these Evergreen scale models, it's prescribed styrene. It comes in either 3/8 inch squares or half-inch squares. So if you figure that out, an HO scale, the 3/8 inch grid is about 2.71 scale feet. The half-inch grid is 3.63 square feet. Oh, not square feet, linear feet. Neither of those is big enough for a sidewalk, but if you put down a double row of it, now it becomes a little over 5 feet for the 3/8 inch and a little over 7 feet. No, a little over 7 feet for the half-inch one. And that's about right. So I think that has a lot of promise. You would want narrower sidewalks in an alley or a side street. You would want wider sidewalks on a main street. A look that I really love is where there may have been streetcar tracks at one point in time, which were typically paved in between the tracks with cobblestones or brick. And what often happens in an election year is they do a paving job called a politician's special. And that's where the politicians want to get reelected, so they pave the street, but they only put down an inch of asphalt. And an inch of asphalt doesn't last very long. So over not too much time, it's going to start to pop off, particularly where the streetcar tracks were. And this modeling job here is just fantastic. Prototype on the right, model on the left. But it also looks to me like this modeler did the strip styrene curbs here. You can see it's not entirely uniform. It looks like maybe the sidewalk has a little bit of an angle to it. But that's what you can end up with if you use that method. And I think it looks pretty darn good. The cracks in the road and the grass growing up between the cracks in the sidewalk, great detail. And look at the leaves laying in the gutter. Really, really nice scene. Here's another street scene with a concrete street, obviously in an industrial part of town where there's street running. That is not something you're going to be able to do with the Walther system. That's something where you're either going to have to pour some type of liquid material, let it set, and then carve slab lines in it, or arguably you could do that with styrene. This is Vic Smith's layout that I had mentioned before. It's called City's Edge, and you can see how he's mixed his pavement up. Not at all uncommon in a big city to see a concrete street that they don't want to take the time to rip out a whole slab of concrete to replace it if there's a repair needed. They'll just go in and do the repair and then fill it in with asphalt. Just in the center of the picture towards the bottom, you can see a square of concrete around a manhole. That is very, very common if there's a repair needed at that manhole, that the utility that owns the sewer may require concrete repairs around the manholes. So they'll come in and just do a square with formwork around that manhole lid and then fill in the rest with asphalt. But the cracks, the potholes, the utilities are all just fantastic. Chooch Enterprises, which is now owned by Walthers, has a sheet of flexible material which is cobblestone, and it really, really looks nice. I have some. I've not used it yet. I'm a little queasy about what's going to hold it down because it is a flexible material, and I found that glues that dry hard probably aren't going to last with that. So it may be something where you want to use a tacky glue or canopy cement to glue this down. But I think that has some great potential. If you want to do brick and cobblestone streets, that Walther system does come in brick pattern, and that's what you're seeing in the lower right corner there. But bush scenery paper, which is two-dimensional, or some places even have three-dimensional molded sheets of brick, would work very well. I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a company that made, I think it was Helgen, that made urban structures long ago. And each of those structures came with a square base of molded brick material to build the structure on. And it's not bad material either. You could hand carve it yourself if you have enough patience. I don't. Or you could use the Walther system. My next street on my layout, which I've got laid out here roughly where it's going to go, is going to be a brick street. And I found that to take any other option out there and try and make joints, the joints were apparent. I wanted those joints to just disappear as much as I could. So I ended up buying this embossed brick sheet. It's plastic. It's made by a company called JTT. I got mine at Hobby Lobby, but I know they have an online presence, and I'm sure it's available in some hobby shops. And then I cut the brick sheets to the width I needed, and then was very, very careful to do a square cut at each end. And while it doesn't show up in the picture, and I wasn't going to lift it to try and get a photo, I sandwiched a piece of 0.02 styrene underneath just at the joints to give some overlap to glue that together. And I'm hoping once it's painted and weathered that the joints won't be very visible. Real brick streets typically don't have joints. That's one of the problems with the Walthers. You can see the joints there between the individual pieces, which to me does not look realistic. So next time I'll let you know how this turned out. One of the fun things about brick cobblestone streets is that oftentimes different types of brick are used when a repair is made, so the color may vary a little bit. This was an orange brick street, but when it was repaired with red brick because there wasn't any orange brick in the Public Works Department's yard. That's a neat detail to model. Oftentimes, too, if they had, say, a water main break and they dig up the street to repair it, the water utility might not want to get into dealing with bricks, so they may just put concrete or asphalt in there to finish the repair up. Some of the things to model with street surfaces would be expansion joints in concrete. Slabs are typically close to being square, but according to a concrete contractor I know, he said you never want to go more than 1.5 times on the longest dimension versus the shortest dimension. So you might do a 15 foot by 10 foot slab, but he said once you get longer than that 15 foot, you run the risk of the thing fracturing. Traffic markings are critical in an urban setting, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Utility cuts and patches are a great thing to model. Potholes, cracks, there's as soon as you can gouge out with a knife. Traffic stains from oil. And we mentioned about the pavement delamination, especially over trolley tracks. Here's a good example of street markings. That's a stop bar on the right and a crosswalk, and then a no parking zone straight ahead there on the far side of the intersection. And you can also see a yellow painted curb on the opposite side. I'm not sure what's going on there, why there's no parking there, but there isn't. Okay, I said we would come back to this. There's a company out there called Highways and Byways Model Railroad Graphics. You can see their web address in the upper left corner there, highwaysandbyways.net. They sell a great variety of pavement markings in both HO and N scale. And that little piece of road that I showed, that I said was up against the backdrop, that's how I got the left arrow coming up to the intersection that I didn't model because it's off the layout. But their stuff is really, really nice. My only complaint would be that when you put it down in your road, it looks brand new. And a gentleman from there told me that you can dull it down a little bit by rubbing it with some alcohol. But what do you do to get paint off your models? Soak them in alcohol, right? All I could think of was that stretch of road, which is now installed and not really mobile. If I were to try and use alcohol to dull down the new looking traffic markings, I have a terrible feeling that I would end up taking the paint off the road, and now how am I going to repaint it? So I haven't tried that. I should. I would also think maybe you could take some very fine sandpaper and just scuff it up a little bit. I did try to weather it somewhat with weathering chalks, but I don't think it was very effective. Okay, here's another concrete street that shows an example of where there may have been some utility cuts. Maybe a new water service line or gas service line was installed, but you can see where the concrete was cut out in a rectangular shape, and the new concrete doesn't quite match. You can also see some asphalt repairs there and a crack down the middle of the slab on the right. Potholes, they're everywhere in concrete and asphalt streets. Another example, this obviously was a utility cut where a new sewer line was put in. You can see the manhole in the middle of the new pavement, and you can see it looks like the line comes into that manhole at a little bit of an angle and then continues up underneath the sidewalk straight ahead. Another example of the delamination over brick, a politician's special paving job. Here was a picture I saw in a magazine. I thought they maybe overdid a little bit, but I like the traffic markings and I like the stains on the pavement. You can see where the cars are turning the corner there, and the oil stain starts to curve to meet the curve of the road. This is a module that frequently appears at the Timonium show just north of Baltimore. I believe it's called the Four County Engineer Society. I thought this guy did a very nice job with an urban scene. Here's a more rural scene with a curved road, but again, you can see the stains on the pavement. Another one that I grabbed, you can see an asphalt patch on the left here, right by the bridge abutment, and some faded traffic lines down the middle of the road. Looks like there's some joints coming through. I don't know whether that maybe was a concrete road that was overlaid with asphalt over time. Joints from the concrete tend to reflect through the asphalt. That's a neat thing to model. Another picture of, clearly this is a concrete road, but it looks like there's been some asphalt repairs done on this. Great weathering, not only of the road, but the buildings and the bridge itself. Another picture of Vic Smith's. We saw that as an overhead shot before. Another one. I thought this was beautifully done. The gentleman who modeled this did those cracks with a gray fine-tipped Sharpie. So there's nothing three-dimensional about that at all. And yet I look at that and I see a crack. I thought he did a very good job. I've tried to do that on a stretch of road and I wasn't real pleased with the way it turned out, but maybe with some more practice, I can master it. Okay, curbs. Typically they're 6 to 7 inches high when the road is new. As more asphalt is put down, that 6 to 7 inches may get down to 3 or 4 inches. You can have asphalt wedge curbs, which is what you see on a suburban street. You can have concrete curbs or cut stone curbs. Your curb markings tend to be yellow for no parking, red for a fire hydrant or fire lane, and blue for handicap parking. You're not going to see that in an older layout. You're going to see that in a more modern layout. In the old days, we didn't pay much attention to the needs of handicapped people. And in fact, the American with Disabilities Act didn't come along until I believe it was 1990. So having curb cuts for wheelchair accessibility at intersections, if you're modeling something from the 50s, that probably would not have been a feature of that town. There's an ADA ramp, a curb cut, speaking of the devil. There's a cut stone curb. You will see those in older cities and towns. They drilled holes in stone, and then that gave a fault line that they could break a piece of stone off and use that as a piece of curb. Sidewalks are generally concrete, but they could be stone or brick. They vary in width from 4 feet to 10 feet or more. I don't think anybody's going to bother building a sidewalk for a 2 or 3 foot sidewalk. 4 feet's what you may see on a side street in a downtown section. You're likely to see 8, 10, 12 feet, depending on kind of how far back the buildings sit. Is it a grand urban plaza, or is it a busy, narrow street? I love that feel of a big, busy downtown area, but it's tough to devote 10 or 12 feet in HO scale to a sidewalk. It's a lot of room you're taking up. Many, many manufacturers make styrene sidewalks or wood, laser cut wood sidewalks, which look great. I didn't attempt to catalog all of them, but there's a lot available out there. And then I had mentioned about slabs. Generally, they're square or close to square, but no more than 1.5 to 1. There's a very good example of some urban renewal. They did a brick patterns in the sidewalk, and then individual slabs going back to the storefronts. That sidewalk is 8 feet deep or 8 feet wide, just to give you a means of comparison. There's a story I had seen in an old model railroader where the guy was, his hot button issue was sidewalks, and he was showing deteriorated sidewalk, grass growing up through the joints, places where asphalt had been used to repair sidewalk. Very, very convincing. This is some typical sidewalk details you can model. And it shows at the bottom there that a sidewalk should slope away from the building ever so slightly so that the drainage drains to the street. And then there should be a curb and a gutter on the street, and the street ideally should slope from the center out to the edge. Beautiful detail here of a sidewalk in an urban setting. And how about the front walk going up to the house of individual stones? As I said, there are many makers that make commercial sidewalks that can be cut down and altered to fit your needs. Blair Line makes some that are very nice. I mentioned those ones that Monroe Models has. Those are very, very nice as well. But those are both wood. Styrene is perfectly acceptable also. Now, I used to have quite a few slides in this presentation on utility poles. And one time last summer, a friend of mine and I were going to a meeting one Saturday afternoon, he's driving, and we're driving down the road, and I noticed all these utility poles along this road. And the more I looked, I said, no two of these utility poles are the same. So I started taking pictures. We'll come to that in just a minute. Typically, the spacing between them is 150 to 200 feet. They can be 30 to 50 feet high. I would recommend going low because we don't want to be catching them with our sleeves when we go to re-rail a train. And the details you can include would be transformers, guy wires to resist lateral forces. And if you really want to go for broke, you can put wires on them. But I've seen plenty of people model utility poles and not put wires on them. So I think that gives the feel without having the potential catastrophe of somebody catching the wires and pulling the whole line down. Generally, the higher wires on a utility pole are the higher current, and the lower wires are things like cable TV and telephone lines. Those are the pictures I took barreling down the highway with my buddy last summer. These are 4 consecutive poles with 4 different designs. So if you tell me what should I make a utility pole look like to model it accurately, anything goes. Really, I would just look at old pictures of the area you're modeling or look at the real world today. But there's nothing that anybody could say is wrong. Guy wires are wires typically on bends that'll help resist lateral force. That's a neat detail to model. And there's some articles out there about detailing utility poles. Typically the ones you buy that are preformed plastic, they're the old style that have all the telegraph wires on them for the railroads. You can make those more realistic by taking it down to 1 or 2 cross arms. This guy, he took a razor saw and scribed the pole to try and give it some wood grain, which is a good idea. And there's a beautiful article that was in MR about how you can detail them with transformers and what it looks like on the left there. There's a company on the internet, and they scaled back significantly last spring, although they're still selling their Easy Wire. They sell a very elastic wire that can be used for utility poles, and they promise that if it gets bumped or struck by something, it'll bounce back to the length that it was before. I've not used it, but I've seen their demonstration at the shows, and it's pretty impressive stuff. But honestly, with utility poles, anything goes. You go out and look around your town, and you can see almost any possible configuration. So nobody can say you're wrong. Okay, so what's underneath the street surface? Well, here's kind of an X-ray view of what an intersection might look like in a busy city. And of course, from the surface, all we're seeing are the manhole lids, but underneath there's a whole lot going on. And the manhole lids are the the features that give that indication from the real world up top. There's water lines. One kind of neat thing you can do if you're modeling fire hydrants is to paint your fire hydrants for whatever that town you're modeling used. And you can find that in old pictures. Some places paint them yellow, some places paint them silver. The one on the far right there, that's near where I live, and they paint the large steamer cap there either green or orange or yellow to let you know whether that's a high flow hydrant or a low flow hydrant. So it's just a neat little feature you can do to help capture the feel of the town you're in. This is something I really like on a big office building or in a manufacturing plant. They typically have standpipes where the fire department can hook up their hoses, and that will feed water to internal sprinkler systems. And you'll typically see like a hose reel on the wall in some of these buildings that can be used to fight fire rather than trying to drag hose up the steps. Walthers makes this. They have a kit now called an industrial details kit, and it does include some of these. I had gotten some years ago in a little firefighting accessories pack from one of the German manufacturers. Does the same thing. Gas valves and water valves, you don't see all of that from the surface. You only see that lid. They're about maybe 8-inch diameter. That's what I modeled on that one picture with finishing nails. Um, it made me happy. I don't know that most people would know what it is, but it's a nice feature to have. Storm sewers or catch basins. This was the one I showed in that earlier photo. It was made by a company called Scale Structures. They sell white metal castings. At the time I had put these on my layout, they were 3 for $2.49, or probably a whole lot more now. But those are typically found every 200 to 300 feet on an urban street. And you're only going to find them on streets with curbs, because otherwise, what's channeling the water into the catch basin? And typically, you'll see these on a downslope just before an intersection, because they want to catch the water before it runs into that intersection. If you don't have curbs, you may have a storm inlet that looks like this. This is the more modern storm inlet that you see more often these days. That could be beautifully modeled with a piece of roof walk, the etched brass roof walk you could put on freight cars to detail them. Just cut out a little piece that's 2 foot by 4 foot, paint a black rectangle underneath it, and slap that down on your street surface. This is the kind we had where I grew up with, an open throat style that I had called out in that one picture before. I just thought that was so typical of an urban scene. But you could file that into your curb with a little file, or use a little piece of styrene, C-channel, to make that open throat, and then paint the inside black. Nobody's going to look in there. Sanitary sewers. You may not think much about what a sanitary sewer is underground, because typically all we see is the lids. But there's a lot more to that structure that you don't see from the surface. Now, being a civil engineer, I had to have sanitary sewers on my layout. So my son, who's pretty good with 3D printing, he took that drawing that I was able to come up with on the bottom left and made a file, and we printed our own manholes. You'll see that type of a cone at the top of the manhole in suburban areas, in the woods, maybe along stream banks. This one happens to be along the edge of a road. And then that is the Walther's manhole cover from their street kit. And as you can see in the diagram in the upper right corner, Walther's absolutely nailed it with that manhole lid. And if you measure it and compare it to that catalog cut sheet there from the foundry, the dimensions are spot on. So I give Walther's a big salute for that. So it's a neat little piece of realism that we have here and there. I plan to put an area on a street somewhere where it won't be bumped, where I could drill a hole in the street and then take some brick paper and line that hole with brick paper, and then have a sewer crew there working with the lid off, maybe televising the sewer or cleaning it. It'd be a nice feature to make some realism. At least in Pennsylvania, sanitary sewers have to have a manhole every 400 feet. That would be the longest possible run. So in an urban setting, you'll very typically see them at intersections. You'll see them where the line may bend if you're going around a curve in a road, but 400 feet is the maximum. Yep, there's a blank slide there. Street lights. Years ago, and I'm talking 30, 40 years ago, the only street lights you could find were European styles. And not that they weren't realistic, they just weren't realistic for the US. These are some pictures of them, and you can see both real and models. They're not bad looking streetlights, but I just never felt they were particularly correct for the US. They're typically placed 150 to 200 feet apart, as you saw on the handout that I had provided Larry. I was overjoyed when Walther's came out with these streetlights, because I thought those really screamed US prototype. And I bought probably about 30 of these. And then my son pointed out, you know what, Dad, those aren't LEDs. And you put those in, over time, they're going to burn out. And I'm kind of getting to the point now where, like, why would you want to design in a problem? Let's just do it with LEDs. So I've not used any of the 30 I bought. They'll probably show up on eBay one of these days. But what Atlas now makes, they do have pretty much the same style of street light, and they are LEDs. So those came out about a year and a half ago, and I highly recommend those. There's also a company on eBay, and the seller name is We Honest, and they are in China, and they sell street lights and traffic signals and various types of LED lighting for buildings. That traffic signal post that I have there, I'm not sure my memory is exactly right, but it was something like $10, $12 for a pair of those traffic signals. That's incredible. I think Walther's, if you buy their overhead hanging street lights like that, it's something like $24 for one. So their stuff is pretty nice and pretty American prototype. So I've bought several intersections worth of these, and I'm looking forward to putting those in. That'll be the last thing once the sidewalk is installed. When you do traffic lights, make sure you do a control box somewhere. Older style, it didn't have as much hardware in it, so they would mount that on a post. Today, they tend to be mounted on the ground in an intersection somewhere. But it's a great addition to add a little bit of realism. Walthers does have their traffic signals available that you can hang them from wires like this. I'm not sure I have the patience. I don't think I'd want to tie my own fishing flies either, but seems like just about the same amount of torture there to try and hang these from wires. But I may try an intersection with that. Other details you may want to think about adding around your street scenes are bus shelters, phone booths, parking meters, trash cans, mailboxes, fire alarm boxes, uh, parking lot bumpers, newspaper boxes. And does anybody know what a sidewalk elevator is? Um, in urban areas, a lot of times the basement of the building came out underneath the sidewalk, and they would have a pair of doors that opened up. It almost looked like a tornado cellar that would get down into the basement so they could receive deliveries from delivery trucks. Somebody makes a model of that. I'm thinking maybe it's Blair Line. But here's all things that are commercially available that you can add to your layout to add that realism. Another shot of some things from Blair Line and Evergreen, Rick's. All of those are out there and are available to help detail your scene. This is a wonderful resource. Now, my slide shows a 2003 edition. There's much later editions now, but it's called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And if you were to get online and Google MUTCD, you will get the latest version of this. It's 700 pages thereabouts, but you can download it to your computer, and it provides details on everything regarding highways. As far as widths, dimensions, traffic signs, you can take the traffic signs in here and scan them and print them out at a smaller scale for your layout. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. I showed you that one photo of the underpass that I have on my layout. So I got down to how do I know how high to put the exit sign, which is announcing the exit that was a mile ahead. It's in here. 17 and a half feet of clearance is what you need underneath an overhead sign. And then the bottom left corner there, that's a street sign from from Pittsburgh. And I just thought that was kind of a neat feature. A lot of cities have a distinct color pattern that they use for their street name signs. So if that's something that'll help make the viewer say, oh yeah, I know where that is, do it. Make a blue sign with white letters. And then use details to give a sense of time and a sense of place. When's the last time you saw a freestanding fire alarm box? That's something from years ago, but that may be something that's appropriate for the area that you're modeling. How about a traffic signal that's just red and green and doesn't have the yellow light? I can't tell you how far back that goes, but it goes back a ways. and take some signs, some directional signs, and call out local businesses or local towns or local street names, highway numbers. Those are all things that will make your layout seem more realistic and more correct for the area that you are modeling. Here's one. This is the gentleman I had mentioned that has the Western Road with the motels and the fast food restaurants. So he put signs on there, Daneville and Lancaster. Those are towns either near or on his layout. Helps identify where he's modeling, right? Beautiful weathering on this, but look at the yellow and black stripes to help drivers negotiate the underpass there to help keep them centered in the lane. The yellow ends on the guardrails, the deer crossing sign, speed limit sign. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Make your scenes come to life. Nothing makes your layout come to life more than putting some scale people on it. And Walthers and I guess it's Bachman, I think they call it Scene Masters. They now sell, you can buy kits of work crews that are doing different things. Well, they have a kit of municipal workers, and there's people working on telephone poles. There's sewer workers that are looking down into manholes. Those are great details to bring your scene and make it come alive. These are three of my favorite resources for urban modeling. I think you can probably still find all of those, but there are countless articles in the various magazines and journals as well. And then I mentioned Vic Smith's layout. Green Frog, gosh, I don't know, can you even buy DVDs anymore? They did a DVD of his layout, which of course I bought as soon as I saw it was available, and it's really inspiring. So with that, I think I came in under an hour, but there's my 90 to slide. So are there any questions? Is there anything I can answer?